Jane Seymour spent decades saying no to revealing shoots, then suddenly said yes to Playboy at 67. Victoria Valentino was 77 years old when she posed for Playboy. So, why did these women pose decades after Hollywood said their time was up? Was it ego or rebellion, or something much deeper? In this video, we unpack the real stories behind the most iconic over 60 Playboy covers, and how they rewrote the rules of age, beauty, and power in Hollywood. Let me start with the one that shocked Hollywood the most: Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was 67 when Playboy first called, and she was astonished. Here was this legendary magazine asking her to pose, decades after most people would consider their modeling days over. See, this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. The woman had been getting calls from Playboy for years. And every single time, she'd say no thanks and hang up. But something shifted in her mind around 2018. Now get this. This was actually her third time working with Playboy. Her very first shoot happened way back in 1973 when she was just a young actress trying to make it in Hollywood. Then she did another one in 1987. But 45 years had passed since that first one. 45 years! Most people would think their modeling days were long behind them. Not Jane Seymour. The media went crazy when word got out. Coverage across People, Entertainment Tonight, and major outlets was everywhere, with headlines screaming about Dr. Quinn herself posing for the magazine. Why? Because nobody expected the classy British actress to do something like this at her age. But here's what really made people's jaws drop. She looked absolutely incredible. And she did the whole thing completely natural. No plastic surgery, no Botox, no fancy injections. Nothing. Just her, exactly as she was at 67 years old. The photos were tasteful, partially clothed shots taken right there in her home by photographer Aaron Fever. She wanted to control every aspect of the experience. Seymour said something during the interviews that stuck with everyone. She looked straight into the camera and said, "I feel much sexier now than I ever did when I was younger." Think about that for a second. A 67-year-old woman saying she feels sexier than she did in her 20s. That's not something you hear every day. The public reaction was wild. Women her age started writing letters to magazines saying they'd felt invisible for years, but seeing Jane made them feel seen again. They felt like someone was finally representing them. But here's the crazy part. Even younger men reportedly reached out, which Seymour found flattering. When that happens, you know you've made a real statement about what beauty looks like. What Jane Seymour proved that day in her house was something nobody wanted to say out loud before. She showed the world that sexuality doesn't just vanish when you turn 60. But if you think Jane's story was shocking, wait until you hear what happened next. As the next woman took a bolder step that smashed records and expectations entirely. Mamie Van Doran. Mamie Van Doran was 75 years old when she did something that made Playboy history in October 2006. 75! Most people that age are worried about their grandkids or what's for dinner. Not Mamie, she had other plans. This woman was one of the original Hollywood bombshells, a contemporary of Marilyn Monroe and Jane Mansfield. These blondes ruled the 1950s and 60s. They were the pinup girls every guy had on their wall and every woman wanted to look like. Mamie was right there with the biggest names in Hollywood history. But here's the crazy part that nobody saw coming. She submitted a private image from her own archive rather than participating in a Playboy commissioned session. Nobody asked her to do it. The magazine didn't call her up and say, "Hey Mamie, want to pose for us?" Nope. She just took a photo from earlier in 2006 and sent it to them like she was applying for a job at the grocery store. Can you imagine opening that envelope at Playboy headquarters? The magazine couldn't believe what they were seeing. A 75-year-old woman who looked like that? It was completely unheard of. Remember, this was 2006. Social media wasn't around yet. People weren't talking about aging gracefully or body positivity at any age. Older women in magazines? That just didn't happen. Van Doran had always said she'd never be too old to be sexy. She'd been saying this for years, but most people figured it was just talk. Well, she meant every single word of it. She attributed her amazing figure to good genes and confidence, not plastic surgery or fancy treatments. Just pure Mamie being Mamie. When the October 2006 issue hit the newsstands, people absolutely lost their minds. She was officially the oldest woman ever featured nude in the magazine. Think about that record for a second. Playboy had been around since 1953, and nobody had ever broken this barrier before. The photo showed her wearing nothing but high heels and some jewelry. That's it. And she looked absolutely stunning. This wasn't some heavily edited fantasy shot either. This was a real 75-year-old woman showing the world what confidence looks like. Baby boomers welcomed her return, celebrating that glamour didn't need to end at 40 or 50 or even 70. Women who thought their sexy days were behind them suddenly had a new hero. Sure, some people questioned if the photo was heavily airbrushed. There's always going to be skeptics, but most folks just respected her guts to do it. CBS and other major news outlets covered her record-breaking appearance. The reaction was mostly positive, with genuine admiration for her daring move. Doran had just completely shattered every rule about aging in Hollywood. She did it on her own terms, with her own photo sent in her own envelope. She proved that when you've got confidence and attitude, age really is just a number. But Mamie's record wouldn't stand forever. While Mamie's fearless move made history in the US, across the ocean, another woman was about to make an even more powerful statement. Victoria Valentino. 14 years later, Victoria Valentino stepped back into those same pages at 77 years old. From 1963 to 2020, that's a 56-year span. Think about that for a second. Most people can't even remember what they had for lunch last week, and this woman was returning to the same magazine after more than half a century. She was Miss September 1963. Picture it, a young, gorgeous brunette gracing the pages when the magazine was still pretty new. She had everything going for her. Hollywood was calling, opportunities were everywhere, and she was on top of the world. But then, something terrible happened that made her disappear from Hollywood completely. Valentino became a nurse. She walked away from the spotlight and nobody heard from her for decades. While other playmates were trying to stay famous, she was taking care of sick people and living a completely different life. Most folks probably figured she'd just faded away like so many other models from the 60s. Then, in 2014, everything changed. She came forward as one of the first women to publicly accuse Bill Cosby of rape. This wasn't some publicity stunt or attention grab. This was a woman with nothing to gain and everything to lose, telling her truth about something that happened years ago. She opened the floodgates for other victims to speak up. When Playboy called her for their 2020 equality issue under Cooper Hefner's leadership, the magazine had completely changed its approach. They weren't just looking for young models anymore. They wanted to tell real stories about real women who'd lived real lives. She chose a dignified, clothed portrait to make her point. She posed fully clothed in glamorous outfits with retro 70s styling that looked absolutely stunning. But the message was crystal clear. Older women have stories to tell and strength to show. These weren't typical magazine photos trying to sell fantasy. These were portraits of survival and power. She used the platform to speak about her advocacy work, turning a page in her own healing journey. The media treated this like the powerful statement it was. This wasn't some gimmick or cheap publicity trick. Major news outlets covered her return as real social change. They understood what was happening here. A woman who had been silenced was now speaking loud and clear. Valentino said being in Playboy at 77 was an odd way to label myself, but I'm glad to be part of history. She knew how strange it sounded. Most people don't get second chances in magazines after 56 years. But she also understood the bigger picture of what she was representing. She'd gone from victim to survivor to advocate. Now she was closing the loop on her own terms. The young woman who had been hurt was now the older woman who'd fought back and won. The magazine that once showed her as a pretty face was now showcasing her as a force to be reckoned with. This wasn't just about breaking age barriers. The real story was about reclaiming power and showing that courage has no expiration date. Victoria had just proven that strength only gets better with age. Victoria's comeback wasn't the only moment stirring controversy and celebration. The next woman's rebellious act in the Netherlands sparked a nationwide frenzy. Patricia Pay. Patricia Pay was 60 when she decided to blow up the Netherlands with one magazine cover. I'm talking about December 2009, when this Dutch entertainer walked into a photo shoot that would make the whole country lose its mind. See, this wasn't her first time with Playboy either. She'd posed for them back in 1984 when she was younger. But this time was completely different. This Dutch entertainer had posed for Playboy before, but now she was making a statement. Pay called it a rebellious act and said women shouldn't have to fade away just because they get older. Think about that for a second. A 60-year-old woman telling society to shove it when it comes to aging. That takes serious guts. She became the oldest model in Playboy Netherlands at 60. When Playboy Netherlands put her on the cover in December 2009, the country went absolutely nuts. I mean, crazy reactions everywhere you looked. The Dutch media couldn't stop talking about it. Some people were cheering her on, others were completely horrified. One media personality sneered about how only necrophiles would want to see a 60-year-old centerfold. Real classy, right? But here's the thing. Some people made nasty ageist comments, but sales numbers don't lie. That Christmas issue became Playboy Netherlands' best-selling issue of the entire decade. The entire decade. People were buying it faster than the stores could stock it. All those critics talking trash, but the public was voting with their wallets. Women's rights groups started calling Pay a hero for striking a blow against age discrimination. They saw exactly what she was doing. This wasn't just some publicity stunt or desperate grab for attention. This was a woman taking a stand and saying older women deserve to be seen and celebrated. The whole thing proved that beauty isn't just for young people, and the public was ready to hear that message. Dutch commentators were calling her move a direct challenge to ageism. Finally, someone was showing the world that women don't just disappear when they hit a certain birthday. Now, get this. Instead of hurting her career, the shoot gave Pay a huge boost. She kept her television roles and became even more famous than before. When she published her tell-all memoir in 2013, it became a bestseller, partly because people couldn't stop talking about her Playboy buzz. Everyone wanted to know more about the woman who'd caused such a stir. Pay had just proven that 60 really could be the new 40 and opened doors for older women everywhere. She'd shown that confidence and attitude matter more than your birth certificate. These 4 women had each broken barriers in their own way, challenging how the world sees aging forever. Seymour redefined natural aging without apology. Doran broke records entirely by her own choice. Valentino reclaimed her narrative after decades of silence. And Pay sparked a cultural shift that sold magazines like crazy. If you liked this video, make sure to watch the other videos in our channel about beautiful ladies of yesteryear.